This book blew me away. I loved it. I'll just tell you right off, I'd give it like a 9 or 10 out of 10. But the book is by Arthur C. Clarke, a classic sci-fi author. He's the author of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Childhood End is about, so it kind of flips the First Contact alien invasion on its head, and it's about aliens that suddenly show up, Independence Day style, and they have their ships come over a bunch of the main cities of the world, like New York, Tokyo, whatever. But instead of an invasion, they just remain there, kind of somewhat peacefully, and they enforce the world through a kind of soft power into getting rid of poverty, war, disease, crime, and such things like that. So, yeah, I love this whole idea of flipping the kind of trope on its head of like an alien invasion. And this book, it's split into 3 parts. So in the first part, the aliens show up and they kind of get into an agreement with the humans, and they have like a relationship that's kind of developed. And most of the humans eventually comply, not right away, but whenever they don't comply, there's ways of, and I didn't mention this, but the humans call them the overlords, so those are the alien invaders. But whenever any of the populations of the humans don't comply, the overlords kind of use soft power to change their mind. And so one example of this is like, I think there was a part where, I can't remember exactly what the disagreement was about, but essentially to like change their minds again, the overlords like blotted out a section of the sun over a section of the earth. And they're just like, what? How are they doing that? And I guess the thinking is just like, yeah, no way we can like stand up against that technology that we don't even understand at all. They're like far more intelligent and technologically superior than human beings. Their ships float, they're massive. It's very readily apparent. But in this first act, we have like an old like politician that works for the United Nations, and he's the only one that's kind of allowed to go up to the overlord ship, and they have like a kind of a discussion, a kind of like a open communication dialogue, kind of like what the president will have with the prime minister or something like that. But there's like a split off group, a kind of fractured group called the Freedom League, and they don't really agree with the overlord's presence and their goals, and they say they're not really to be trusted, and this isn't necessarily the best thing for humanity. But on the large, humanity kind of learns to accept them, because after the months or years or whatever, the only thing that they see is an increase in their standard of living. Like I said, poverty decreases, crime decreases, and war decreases. But the Freedom League's thing is, they were saying, how can we trust someone whose identity we never know? We don't know what they look like. And like I said, they stay on board their ships and they only communicate with one human, and they don't come down. And this is something that kind of resonated with a lot of the population, because I think there's a part in the book where Arthur C. Clarke goes a little bit on a tangent about how human curiosity can never be sated, which I think is very true. So the overlords state that they will reveal themselves in 50 years. That way, humanity will be intellectually enlightened enough to see them, but also a whole generation would have passed, and now there would be children and adults born that had never known life without the overlords in the sky. So it would have become completely normal to them. And the reveal that happens at the end of part 1, I thought was just incredible. Like, it's definitely one of the best reveals I've seen in sci-fi. as well as being awesome, it just opens up a dialogue of just really deep themes on like power and good and evil and religion and stuff like that. So we were entered into part 2 after this, and this is dubbed the Golden Age, after the overlords have already been here. And it kind of focuses on 2 things. One is like utopia in and of itself, and kind of how the race as a whole will react to it. It's not necessarily a good thing. There are definitely some downsides to it. For example, there's a few different things brought up, but one of them would be a decline in achievements. So like scientific achievements and artistic ones, because they say that those kind of things are born out of struggle. The best of art and the best of like science comes from struggle. And also there's kind of the idea where it's like, why would you need to learn anything if the overlords already have all the answers? And the other part of part 2 is a kind of a weird one. It's like a big theme of it is the paranormal, and it's some random party. And we get introduced to a bunch of new characters as well. Part 2 I was just kind of like, it's kind of seemingly a bit random. I don't know what's going on here. But then in part 3, everything that was going on in part 2 just wraps around so beautifully. Like the paranormal theme that was going on in part 2 that I was kind of like seeing it as a bit aimless, just came back and it was just like, wow, that was amazing the way it was wrapped into the story. It really got me thinking, and it actually kind of made me contemplate, not quite change, but contemplate my beliefs about certain things. And the characters, let me talk about the characters briefly, because there's not really too much to say. I think with a lot of old classic sci-fi books, the characters aren't like the center of the story. There's not that much depth put into them, and I think this one is no different. That's not to say they're bad. They kind of serve a function. So in part 2, there's a character. He's like an astrophysicist, and he's not satisfied even with this utopia, and he wants to. His arc later on is quite interesting in what he does, but I won't talk about it. But I think he kind of like embodies the idea that no matter how much you have or how much you like, it's never enough for humans. Like, we always want more. When you achieve something, then you set a new goal and you go and get it. You can't like just sit there and have what you want and be comfortable and be satisfied, or at least it's unlikely. But there's that character. I think his name was Jan Rodriguez. The character from the first part is called Stormgren. He's the old guy that works for the United Nations, and the overlord, the main overlord that does like most of the speaking and communicates with Earth, is called Karelin. But yeah, the characters are definitely not focused, but I don't think they're bad, and the writing is kind of the same, quite to the point and matter-of-factly. It's got these really religious and spiritual themes rather than just hard sci-fi. Technology, intelligence, how they'd be affected by certain things. So would they enter stagnation if we were to reach a place of utopia or somewhere close to that? Would we just kind of hit a wall? So in part 2, like I was saying, we have this paranormal theme going on. We have a different overlord called Resheverick, I think his name is, and he's at this party. I can't remember whose party it is, but it has these new characters with Jan Rodriguez, George and Jean, and he's investigating this guy's massive library collection into the paranormal. And we don't quite know why yet, but at the very end of this part, there's like a chapter where some of the members of the party are playing like this part's actually kind of weird. in another movie I call it cheesy, but it's just written quite well. But they're playing like a Ouija board, and they're like asking just random questions, and it keeps answering the questions correctly. And I think it's just trying to open up the dialogue and be like, is this real or is it not real? Is it horse? Is it fake or not? But it appears to be real within the story. And at the end, we have a character that asks a question that no one there should know at all, but it turns out to be true. So the question was, which sun orbits the Overlord's home planet, or something like that. And it popped out some coordinates, but then we later find out through this character investigating that it's an actual real place, and it's in the direction that he realizes that the Overlords came from. So now we've gotten some credit to this paranormal activity, but I was talking about Jan Roderick's going to the Overlord's homeworld, and the architecture. So I love this part because seeing the world is just interesting to me. And ever since the idea was even brought up of him going to their home world, I was just like hoping it would happen the whole time, and it did. So it's really satisfying to see. Their world is obviously very different and alien, and it's kind of built around the way they look and are. So for example, there's no roads, there's no artistic flair to any of the architecture. I don't think the Overlords really understand art probably, or are able to like do it. There's like windows and doors in completely random places, and the Overlords carry out a bunch of tests on Jan. I think it's shown like pretty much from the beginning of the book that they're more scholarly than anything else. Like they love information, and they're genuinely curious about the humans. But yeah, when Jan, oh, that's something I didn't mention actually. So his journey there, he sedated himself, or somehow like went into some sort of cryosleep. So the journey there was like a few months, but going there and back, I think like 80 years would have passed on Earth because of time dilation and such. So when Jan gets back, he's going to see something completely different. But meanwhile, on Earth, we're still living in the golden age of humanity, but humanity's on the decline because of laziness and boredom and stagnation and other sorts of issues. So there's a new kind of colony that the characters join called New Athens, and it's basically a place that wants to kind of go back to the old way a bit. They want to struggle a bit more, go back on some of the technology and kind of do things the old way because they believe in that humanity's stagnating and becoming more dumb and helpless, etc. I think someone described it as them basically just going camping. That would be like an allegory for it. You have all that nice stuff already, and it's literally at your fingertips, but you're just choosing to do something else. But yeah, we have like the Overlord studying the couple's children. We don't actually know why yet, but it relates to this paranormal activity thing. And then this is when stuff goes really crazy and we get like a bunch of reveals. So one of their kids begin to exhibit like these crazy, strange powers, and then the Overlords reveal their goal for mankind. And their goal all along was not utopia, it was to usher in the next step in human evolution. So they were literally waiting for this child to turn into... She starts developing powers and basically not acting like a human or child at all. It's like telepathy and telekinesis, and they were waiting for this switch. And I think like it starts with one and then it rapidly spreads like a virus. So within one generation, all of the children basically were like this, and they were like a kind of a hive mind. So they had no identity at all. They basically were not children. And this happened like in a very short amount of time. So within the span of a generation, everyone basically lost their children. And that's why it's called childhood's end. When I realized that, I was like, my God, that is dark. But it doesn't even stop there. So we find out that the overlords, whilst that was their mission, they're not even acting of their own free will. They're basically being commanded by another entity that's above them, but this entity is purely spiritual, called the overmind, and it's basically been forcing the overlords to do their bidding, go into different worlds and making sure that they enter their next evolutionary step to join the overmind. Because what happens on Earth, we go back to Jan Rodrix, who visited the Overlord's planet, and he comes back with them, and 80 years have passed, and he experiences a new world. There's barely any like normal humans left. They pretty much all died out, and all we have are these children that don't act like children. They're basically not children. They're a hive mind. They're just, I don't know what they're doing. They're just like experimenting with their powers, and it's just really alien and creepy. And Jan Rodrix is like, what the hell is going on here? But eventually, they kind of like start, I don't even know what happened, like, they start using their powers, just doing crazy stuff. I think they start like rotating the moon or something, and they start like absorbing the energy of Earth, and then they like transform and they all leave their physical body to go and join the overmind in space, and then like the Earth like blows up or something. Like I think all of the matter, it starts to like deconstruct because all the matter was taken by the children for like energy or something. But yeah, we have Jan, and he's just basically witnessing the end of the world, and there's just some crazy dialogue that just really makes it hit home. And yeah, that especially blew my mind. There was a couple other reveals, not even a couple, there's many that I'm sure I'm gonna forget. The reason the Overlords didn't reveal themselves for 50 years is not the reason that I initially thought. So obviously it's because they look like devils and humanity would freak out, and we think it's because of all the religious symbolism and text and all that kind of stuff throughout history. But they said it's actually another reason. Or what I think what the humans in the story thought was that they had visited humans before, they had come to the Earth before, and that's why you see them in religion and in textbooks and such. But it was something different. It was that humanity had a kind of collective kind of premonition, prescience, and they saw the Overlords in this premonition, and they knew kind of instinctively that the Overlords would be linked to the eradication of humanity, and they saw Corellon, his face, and that's kind of where their fear of demons came from. And I thought that was a really interesting spin on the whole thing, because it wasn't what I expected at first. If I was to mention any flaws, well, writing and characters are a little bit on the weaker side. Like I said, they're not bad, but if you're looking for something really poetic and really deep characters with crazy character arcs, you won't find that here at all. This is a really thinking, high concept, theme heavy book, and yeah, Childhood End, best book of the year so far. But I'd love to know what you thought of it, and if you've read any other Arthur C. Clarke books, which ones would you recommend, and which other classic sci-fi books should I read next?